Hello, slapstick audience. What a delightful way to start any kind of show. I'm Robin Ince. I've done many of the slapstick events before. As obviously you know, it's all online at the moment. Watching that scene, and I don't know how many times I've seen that, it will be into triple figures. And I actually could almost feel tears forming in my eyes because there's just such utter joy. And the people last year, if any of you were at the Slapstick Festival, you know that I spoke to Steve Merchant about his love of Laurel and Hardy, and we had a wonderful time. And we're going to extend that now with two people. We were talking just before we started recording this about when we first met, and it's weird because I think about how young both of them were, and then I remember, I was quite young as well. Matt was a mere 18 years old, but I was just 23. Can you believe this was ever 23? And Noel. So we're joined by Matt Lucas and Noel Fielding, both of whom, of course, have been in forms of double acts. Noel, to some extent, I would say a more solid kind of a Laurel and Hardy-esque. Matt, more of a kind of two Ronnies double act, but nevertheless, both double acts. So I just want to start off. Thank you so much for doing this. Matt, watching that scene, what is your first reaction?
Well, it's hello everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and
hello,
it's
Matt.
lovely to be here with you, Noel and Robin. Well, it's the charm of that scene, and when I was thinking about Way Out West, that's always the first scene that comes to mind. And I think what's interesting about it is that I mean, it's not a scene where anything goes wrong. You know, it's not like they start a dance and one of them gets a foot caught in a bucket,
no.
and and it goes wrong, and one of them falls over on the other one, and then, do you know what I mean? And lands on a wagon that pulls away or anything like that. It's literally just a dance of charm, and there's very few people that you'd want to spend time with where you just happily watch them just express joy in such a sort of simple way, without any cynicism, with just innocence and a love of life. And that's what I think when I see that scene. It's just sweetness.
That's an interesting, because watching that, sometimes at the moment, some of the kind of free speech activists, whatever the hell you want to call them, you know, they always go, comedy is, it's always been about anger, and it's always been about questioning power. And then you watch something like that and you go, no, sometimes it's just about delicate beauty and something that is just this fine edge of the absurd. Yeah. It's almost not absurd. So Noel, yes, your first reaction to watching that again?
It's very pure, and it's almost ambient. It evolves naturally in real time. A bit like Jack Tatty, it just unfolds and you're enjoying, and they're not hurrying it. I think the problem a lot with comedy, especially modern comedy, is it's fast. How many jokes can you get into 30 seconds? Let's keep changing direction, changing mood, you know. What's beautiful about that is you've already invested in those guys. You love them anyway. So you're happy to be in their company, really, and they can take their time, and then the rewards are sort of almost bigger because you don't feel like you're being bashed over the head with anything. You don't feel like you're being shown a magic trick. You're just letting them. It's so it is so happy and beautiful and childlike, and it makes you feel like everything's possible when you watch that kind of comedy, and you just sort of have a nice feeling when you leave from that comedy, you know. I like a lot of dark comedy as well, but sometimes after dark comedy you love it, but then after you don't ever want to see it again, and it can alter your mood, and you can feel angry and sort of, you know, twisted. But that is just it's on another level of purity, isn't it? It is beautiful.
See, that
it's childlike, and it's also, it's two men dancing, but it's not yeah, it is, but it's not like it's not like a sexual. There's nothing sexual about two men dancing
No.
there. It's purely innocent.
But
And
also shows off what they do best is them two in frame together. And it's the same as the Marx Brothers. When you put them all, their heads in frame, you just got some gold that you could never manufacture, or you could never put people together in that way. It's just when Laurel and Hardy are in shot together, there's something beautiful about that just works. So
yeah, and the frame trusts them. It's not cutting into close-ups. It's not cutting into reactions while they're dancing. It's just happy to stand back and watch them, as if you were there in the street watching them. And also, I suppose there may have been considered some sort of comedy from the fact that Oliver Hardy is a larger man. And there may have been, you know, it may have been unusual to see a larger man dancing like that. But I just love it.
He was putting me in mind slightly, his dance moves of Sean Cullen. Do you know Sean Cullen? Something about the hands, the way he moves his hands, it's all very precise, but he's always on he's always on tiptoes. He's on the sort of balls of his feet. He's very sort of delicate, the way he moves is very...
He was a very, very delicate dancer, I agree.
Brilliant.
And I think there's something about, there's no apology for his size there. And I think the great thing about Rebel Wilson in Pitch Perfect is she plays herself as the sexiest character in the movie. And she is the sexiest character in the movie by far. And she ignores the fact that she's big, and would normally not be considered the sexiest character in the movie because of her size. And she sort of, that's irrelevant to her. And I think that's what Oliver Hardy's doing here. There's no acknowledgement of the fact that really a man like that, we shouldn't see dancing because he's not slender. He's just dancing. It's just lovely. And also, it's not a moment of tension between the two characters, because usually or often there are opposites, aren't they? And they want different things, or they're failing at something.
There's something about doing something in sync as well. Me and Julian worked out quite early on that we were quite loose and jazzy, and so then if we came together and did something in sync very tightly, something a little bit skillful, even if it was a little dance or a little song in unison, the audience would really respond to that, especially after the looseness of a gig where it felt improvisational. And if suddenly you just honed in on a little piece of business and it was very, physical or musical, sometimes you knew there were certain things you could just do to bring it all together and tighten it up, and you would get a big laugh or a clap even, We knew that if we did these little things called crimps, where we would do these funny little songs that were like folk raps, we did them and they got a little bit more complicated than the audience would expect. And so they knew we'd rehearsed them hundreds of times. But if we did them in sync, it was almost like, I don't know, a sort of precise nugget in amongst the sort of shambolic nature of, the rest of what you were doing. And there's something about that where they're just standing there and then suddenly they're going to go for this dance after, 30 seconds, you're going, oh, they're really going to play the whole thing out. And then you're just enjoying that. And there is something really skillful about it. It's nice to watch. They are both, the way they move is brilliant, isn't it?
I think it's
and also sorry, Robin. The other thing I would just say is that it's not like, often when you see dance, when you see more than one person dancing at a time, you see two people, it's been choreographed and rehearsed so much that they both move in exactly the same way at exactly the same time. And that is considered part of the artistry. So when you're watching the Royal Variety performance and a dance troupe come on and they're doing their moves, it's almost like you could take him on the left and move him over there and you wouldn't notice any different, because they're really regimented. But this dance, it's in sync, but it's not regimented. They move in different ways, and that's fine. So they are dancing in character. You get their personality through the dance, which so often when we see dance, you don't necessarily get the personality of the individual dancer, do you?
That's really interesting, actually, because when we used to do dance routines in the Boosh, we tried to keep them quite childlike. And anytime we would put too many real moves in, the audience didn't like it. It had to be much more silly, childlike, the way that kids dance, you know. So a little bit of fancy business, but hardly. It was more, you know. And Dave Brown, actually, who played Bolo, was a really good dancer. So he used to he used to constantly go, "Come on, let's go through this again." Like, and obviously, none of us were brilliant dancers. One of us would always be out of sync or facing the wrong way, but that was okay in the end because he made the dance move simple enough that if one of you was getting it wrong, it would still be funny, you know.
That's right. Your personality show. It's you. It's like it's the difference, isn't it? It's the difference between playing a character where you're completely buried in prosthetics to look as much like the person you're playing as possible, or where you have just a few things to communicate to the audience that you're playing that person, but we can still see your face. And so I think...
and the audience is enjoying you playing that character, which is very important in comedy, isn't it? Like, even if you have a job, you know, your shopkeepers or your vets or your postman, they're not really interested in you being postman. They want to watch you, how you play that part. It's like, oh, look, he's got a little... You know, it's like if you're shopkeepers, you've got overall, you know, you've got a coat on, and it's like, you do. If you have a broom, you do hold yourself in a completely different way. Sometimes just having a broom or, you know, a bucket, something that is related to work, means that you're in some sort of, I don't know, you're playing a game the way kids are pretending. There's something really nice about that, I think.
The dance thing's interesting because it reminds me of one of the things Matt is most jealous of about me. Matt's career overall has been far greater than mine, but Matt, as far as I know, has never been in a musical with 3-2-1's Ted Rogers. And and I'm just thinking of dancing every single... The moment they found out, they just presume everyone can dance in that world.
Yes.
And then I turned up for the first day, Sue Pollard, Carmen Silvera, and I was taken out of many of the dance routines, but I was still in one. And every single night, you could hear Carmen Silvera from TV's A Lower Low loudly tutting as I was slightly out of time.
Well, Robin, you and I have been we've been in a musical together, haven't we?
Yeah.
I mean, that Eric Idle wrote. And same for me. I was having to learn that dance routine and sing and dance at the same time, which I'm not very good at. I mean, Julian's very musical, plays all instruments. He's very good at, you know, all of that stuff, as Matt is. But I had to learn a very tricky little dance, and we had the best dance teacher. We had Arlene Phillips, didn't we, teaching us? But I mean, it was hairy for a few moments there because me and you were laughing, going, "I don't really dance," and you were going, "No, I don't either." So we were like kids going, "What are we gonna do?"
Yeah.
But there were lots of dancers there, and that's always worse because they're just brilliant, and you're going, "Oh no, this is going to make what I'm doing look even worse." No.
The most subtle dance move we learned was very carefully edging towards the back to make sure we couldn't be seen. A very gentle, soft shoe disappearance into the distance. We better have a look at. Well, in fact, what we could do. So in some ways, I almost don't want to show the clips because there's so much to talk about, and then we can all see the clips afterwards. But we've got a few. So there's a few in terms of influences, and I think this includes some of both of your work as well. But just having a little look at, because I was thinking, Matt, I don't know how you feel about this, but when you were talking about that subtlety of dancing, two people that came into mind, thinking of big people who moved in a way with tremendous subtlety, would have been Alexei Sale when he used to do dance routines, and Zero Mostel as well. I think is someone who was a big person, very, very delicate.
Yeah,
and the Roly Polies that we used to watch when we were kids. Do you remember?
Yeah, Polies. Yes, I've forgotten the Roly Polies.
Yeah, that kind of variety dance troupe of dancers who were much older and in some cases much bigger than you would expect dancers to be. But really good.
I was in Alexei Sale's show once, his sketch show, and I was always quite surprised that he wasn't as big as I thought he was on camera, because the first time I came across him was in The Young Ones, I think, when he was the landlord, and he did a couple of songs in that, didn't he? And he seemed huge because his performance was so larger than life and so in your face, and quite amazing actually for the time. I don't think there were many people like that around. But I remember thinking he was this huge man, but then when I met him, he wasn't really. So it's amazing how much of that is performance, and, you know, when he transforms on stage into a different sort of character, really.
Big, yeah, and having a very small suit.
Yes, tights.
Sorry, Matt.
DM.
Well, here's another thing to consider, which is, I think, really interesting about Laurel and Hardy, because we don't know a huge amount about their process. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is that in the way that, you know, Chaplin had done so much live stuff, Stan Laurel had done a lot of live stuff.
Yeah. And the Marx Brothers hadn't they?
Yes, but Laurel and Hardy were paired during the era of movies. So they were not a pairing that had grown up together for years, like, say, Morecambe and Wise, and worked together and honed their skills, worked out their dynamics, and then you know, and then entered film. They were two individuals that I think found themselves in the same film and then were paired together. I don't know whether it was Max Sennett who paired them.
So they already had their characters evolved. Their characters had already evolved into what.
But I think they were. But I think Oliver Hardy often played the because of his size, his height and his size. He often played the sort of villain, you know, and had a thicker moustache, I think. And so what's interesting is when you look at Laurel and Hardy, you could be forgiven for thinking, oh, they'd done the halls of vaudeville for 20 years before we see them here. But actually, they really hadn't. But
I wonder if that comes from Matt, and you can tell me this about you and David. When me and Julian did our first ever gig together, we recorded it, or someone had the imagination to record it. Maybe Avalon, Rob Azett, someone. And we watched it years later thinking it would be awful, and it was fine. It was as good as anything we were doing 15 years later. Weirdly, our chemistry and dynamic just worked immediately on the first gig. And I wonder, with you and David, was it the same when you got together? Did you just have something that it was not in your control? Because we weren't in control of that, but something about us together in the same space, people just went, yes, please, that. And we were like, really? Oh, okay. Because you don't know, do you? It's like having a sort of magic that you can't control when you're first starting.
Yeah.
Don't have the skills. Yeah.
Me and David had met, were introduced to each other in 1990, briefly, when we were in the National Youth Theatre. And then in 1991, we were in a play together, in the National Youth Theatre, which was a production of The Tempest, where David was either Stefano or Trincolo. And I actually was a techie working on the show. I didn't have any lines or anything. I was bringing props on and off stage. But that was where our sort of friendship started, because we had a shared love of Laurel and Hardy and Reeves and Mortimer. And so during lunch breaks, we would sort of hang out together and even watch, the director even brought in a combi TV video and some tapes of Big Night Out that we watched in the lunch hour ourselves during rehearsals. And I would just watch him in the wings every night and just think he's incredible. And my ambitions were to one day work with David Williams, as he was then, and to meet Reeves and Mortimer. And
that went pretty well, didn't it?
Your ambitions at the age of 20. So that was 1990 that we met. 1991 we started to sort of hang out, and become friends. And then we did our first show together, as in, you know, Edinburgh previews at Jackson's Lane in 95. So we started writing that show in 94. And I was still at university, and David was in London working in children's television, writing for Anton Deck and doing kids' TV shows. And but if I had holidays and weekends and stuff, we'd get together and write. So by the time we did our first show together, although we were discovering what it was like to be on stage together as a double act, we had known each other for 4 or 5 years. But I don't think Laurel and Hardy had. I don't think Laurel and Hardy had. And they did some silent movies together, obviously, and then they did sound movies together. And interestingly, their talking pictures are not just occasionally sprinkled with, you know, a smidgen of dialogue. They are fully realized talking pictures.
Yeah, brilliant.
So that evolution is really interesting for Laurel and Hardy, how they made those decisions, how they worked out their dynamics, their characters, you know, because we take them for granted. But I'm fascinated to know how long they rehearsed for.
Do you think that it's maybe because Stan wrote quite a lot, didn't he?
And directed them as well, yeah.
Do you think that when you have to write the stuff, you have to naturally you have to go into so much more detail about what's going to work, and you have to think about what the other person, what skills they're bringing to the scene and stuff in such a sort of weirdly obsessional way. Like Julian would do something in real life and I would think that can work in the show, you know. And we were hanging out as friends all the time, and you must have been the same. And then you'd do things, improvise things, and think, oh, we could do something with that, and not really know what it was, but you were aware that there were certain aspects of the other person's personality that would work really well. It's interesting, isn't it? But because he was writing, I suppose he was very quickly honing in on what it was that Oliver Hardy did, or how, you know, or what they did together in the scene. It's interesting.
Yeah,
but it's also something both of you do and have done, which I think is about the fullness of the world. You kind of mentioned this right at the start, Noel, which was talking about the subtlety, the drawing in. And I think there's a different style as well, which is we see it in stand-up and we see it in film comedy. Some of it throws it out at you. Here's the joke, here's the joke. And I think what both of you have done is create worlds where you have to walk into that world. It's not throwing the punchlines at you. And I think that's there's been lots of different double acts who are forgotten, and there's lots of different who are not celebrated as Laurel and Hardy. And I think some of it is the genius of Stan Laurel in creating a fully formed world that is not just bits. It's not just, oh, that's a great bit and that's a great bit. It lives as a whole. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you're talking about two comic geniuses, definitely. So obviously they have that, which helps, but there is something about, they have their own, I know from rewatching stuff, I realized they have their own pace and they have their own tone and they have their own style. As much as other people reflect what they did or are influenced by what they did, there's no one really that has that same timing they have, there's a lot of space in their comedy. There's a lot of natural rhythm. There's something, they're not hurried in any way. There's something brilliant about that. It's just, so it's more believable because it's like the way things unfold in real life. You don't feel like you're watching people performing stunts or tricks or dance routines. There's something much more naturalistic about it in a weird way, even though it's quite stagey as well, and they face the camera often and you can tell it's staged. But there is something about their timing that is, I think, the key to it. There's something really that makes you want to be in their world and watch all those things unfold, because you know they're going to unfold as well.
I'll tell you what, let's...
Friends, don't you? You think of them as friends.
Yes, when you do, yeah.
You think of them as friends. Also because they face the camera.
Yeah.
Oliver Hardy in particular, will raise an eyebrow when something goes terribly wrong, which Stan has caused.
The dialogue's very beautifully written as well, isn't it? It's the language they use, and it's quite sparing sometimes. And I don't know, just they enjoy the words that they use. They enjoy saying the things, and they repeat things often. I can't remember. I think it was in the music box where he says, "On top of that stoop," and they keep saying the word "stoop" in quite a weird way. It's like there's something about how they savor the words, even though they're slapstick visual comedians. When they do have a line of dialogue that's nice, there's something really nice the way they handle that dialogue. It's sort of they're enjoying the sound of the words and and I think me and Julian were always interested in the way things sounded rather than necessarily the meaning. Sometimes we just like the way things sounded, the words, and you can get a lot of laughs from just the phonetics of things, the way you put things together, which Vic and Bob obviously love that as well,
Well, hard-boiled eggs and nuts What could be the greatest mix of things to bring to the hospital? What could be the worst combination to take to someone who's in hospital? Hard-boiled eggs and nuts. It's we better have one of the wonderful things about doing these events is Chris, who runs the festival, gives me these things, and it has really specific. You know, Matt and Noel will talk about Laurel and Hardy for 6 minutes and 12 seconds, and all of this.
That's so cool.
So the good thing is we can skip the first half of the show because we haven't got time for that now, and which is what I much prefer. And we're going to go straight into showing one of your favourite clips, Noel, and we'll talk off the back of it, which is, I think, many people's favourite because it has such a beautiful setup. It won an Oscar. Let's have a little bit of a look at the music box. It's just, to me, that is the myth of Sisyphus. If you can't be bothered to read the myths, just watch that. Men trying to get a piano up. And one of the great punchlines, of course, which is they get it to the top and someone says, why didn't you use the road? So they carry it down to use the road. I mean, that world of absurdity is such a... So, Noel, what was it? I mean, I presume the music box might have been one of the ones... It's certainly the one that I fondly remember as a child and perhaps was one of the most repeated.
It's just, there's so many amazing things about that. I mean, the idea that you would love a character so much and find them so charming that they could kick a woman in the scene is a testament to how brilliantly charming and childlike he is. And you actually are willing him to kick that woman. It's so skillfully done, because she's really, that laugh she's doing is really annoying, and you feel their frustration, and you know he's going to do it ages before he does it, or he's going to do something, because he's like a child basically. And he kicks her. And then what's so brilliant about it, and that you're not, I don't think, unless you watch it over and over again, you're not seeing, is the laugh when she hits him back. The laugh that Oliver does comes off that so quickly. The timing of that is so brilliant. The sequence of it, the musicality of it. And then when she hits him, his knee kind of stays in the position. When there's like, they make it look so effortless, but there's like 10 brilliant things happening in 5 seconds. It's just, I guess it's natural talent, but everything about that is almost, the sequence of those events are so perfectly done. And I think what their genius is they let the audience know, they make the audience feel, they basically lead you by the hand. They want you to find the woman annoying. They want Stan to kick her. Then they want Oliver, obviously, to get, Oliver's going to get in trouble. It's perfect clown status, really, because that Stan's going to do it, but Ollie's going to get in trouble for it. And if one of them has to go downstairs, it's going to have to be Stan, because Ollie's going to go, don't, get down there. And that is how it works, really. It's very simple thing, but if you don't have the correct status in a double act, it can't work. It just can't work, basically. If you have the same status, you have to have slightly different status. We talked about this a lot, didn't we, Matt? Because we probably come from, David's probably higher status than you in Little Britain, and Julian's higher status than me. So we were talking about how that would work with us two both being lower status characters, and how we could tweak that in order to make it work for the audience, so that they weren't confused about who was in charge. And
me and David would go back and forth in Little Britain with status, and depending on the character and who they were with in that particular sketch. So it was quite fluid with us. But obviously, me and Noel have formed a new double act on the Bake Off, and we've just done one series, and in that I was often a bit lower status because I played very much the new boy in the show. So I'm sort of learning how to do it.
That's the nice dynamic, because then I can tell you the wrong things because I don't really know what's going on either, which is perfect, really.
Exactly. But I mean, in the series, we might switch that up a bit, mightn't we? Because we don't. Exactly. I can't get away with being the new boy again, because I'm
not as defined. I think with me and Julian, we had the exact Oliver. We had Stan. We had the Laurel and Hardy status exactly. It was pretty much Julian almost would look at camera and go, "This idiot," even though he was an idiot anyway. And I would always end up on top, and it would always be me. I mean, I could probably get away with kicking a woman in the bum, but I don't think Julian could. That's what's quite weird about it, is it depends on your character or what the audience has invested in your character, really. And I think with Stan, there is such a childlike. So what's interesting is I watched these, and then I was hanging out with my 2.5-year-old the next day, and everything she was doing was reminding me of Stan Laurel. It was insane. And we were having breakfast together, and I was like, am I in an Oliver? Am I in a sort of Laurel and Hardy thing? It's like everything she did was Stan Laurel. And I was like, it's amazing how much his character is from children, the sort of the innocence and the purity, but also, you can get away with a lot more as a child. You can do things that you wouldn't, outlandish things really, that you wouldn't be able to do as an adult. And that is part of the joy of it, isn't it? Is that you're watching a world where those things can happen.
It's interesting, Matt, about that line, which sometimes I think can only be found by doing it and seeing the audience kind of reject it. I mean, Noel, you and me were talking about this in I suppose in a different way, but nevertheless, my odd double act with Professor Brian Cox, where he's the smart one, which he actually is, but he still has things that he can't do because of the way his smartness works. And when we do live shows, there is a line of me mocking him or him mocking me, where the audience go, no. We like, and I imagine, Matt, you must have found that, and perhaps also when Little Britain went live as well, when you were doing the live shows, whether there's certain points where you go, this is the line of relationship between the two of us where, whatever it might be, moments of violence which can be totally accepted for one, but then there's a point going, oh, it doesn't work the other way around. It becomes something where they go, oh, we don't like that now. We don't like them.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any specific instances, but in general, I suppose it was a show that was going back and forth over the line all the time and trying to push the line further and further and trying to work out, you know, where we should be. It was a transgressive, subversive piece, and we were learning as we go what the audience did accept and what they didn't accept. And certainly we'd have sketches that we would, you know, everything was recorded either in front of an audience or shot on location and played to an audience. And certainly there were things that were too extreme that an audience just went.
But interestingly enough, there's a little reset with what you do, isn't there? Because I think a new sketch and you're both playing different characters, and that's part of the fun of it, isn't there? You go, oh, what are they doing now? You know, it's got that two Ronnies thing where you're going, oh, great, they're in a shot, they're in a, you know, whatever. Whereas I think if you play, obviously me and Julian played ourselves most of the time. There was a scene actually in the second live show we did where we go to the Arctic and you see me have a dance with the Yeti, basically. I meet the Yeti. And then later on, Julian's saying, I've met this girl. She's amazing. I'm going to go back there. I'm going out there. We're in love. And it turns out it's the Yeti. And I go, not the Yeti. We've all had her. She's an explorer groupie. But it was weird because I think the idea that I might have had a relationship with the girl he liked, and even though it's a Yeti, because it's Boosh, it's absurd, was okay. But when we tried to flip it, for some reason, it was probably just because, you know, when you're doing a live show, it's who can get changed in time. There's a lot of technical things. I think at one point I'd fallen in love with the Yeti, and he said, oh, I've been with the Yeti. And the audience didn't like it at all. They were like, no, that can't happen. It's like, I could sort of sleep with the person he's in love with, and that's funny. But if he did that to me, it's somehow really cruel and horrible.
Yeah.
But is it because he's meant to know better? You're accepted as a child that has no boundaries, that has not yet learned everything about empathy and the way the world works, whereas the slightly smarter one, who might still be an idiot, is meant to know what he's doing.
I think so. And also a lot of it comes from what you look like. And I think the thing with Stan and Ollie, they look like what they're supposed to be, you know, physically. Stan does resemble a child. He's got very open features. He's a bit sort of otherworldly, and Oliver's got a moustache and is much more, you know, he just has a sort of look of a dad or a big brother or something. And I think with those two, you know, just from their faces what their characters are going to be like, which really helps. I think there's something it's hard to play against type, isn't it? It's like with acting, you know, if you don't have the right face, you're not going to get the part, no matter how brilliant you are at acting, you know. There is something naturally
a shorthand with acting, but it is true. I mean, if I think about Little Britain, like Daffyd, the only guy in the village, the kernel of the idea was inspired by somebody we'd both encountered, and it was David who said, hey, you know that guy, but it probably needed to be me to play David because I'm gay, maybe I'm gay, maybe I don't know, and it would have been harder for an audience to accept an actor who wasn't gay playing that character. I don't know, or playing Marjorie, you know, who was sort of attacking other people for being overweight. You know, it probably needed to be me. I mean, that character actually existed before Little Britain from Shooting Stars, but it needed to be in a very primitive form, not really to do with so much with, she wasn't a diet guru or anything, but that needed to be me because I myself am big. And so the character that needed the hypocrisy of someone who was themselves overweight, berating other people for being overweight. Whereas David, who was slender, I think if he did it, it wouldn't be palatable in the same way. I mean, it's quite unpalatable anyway. And everything we would do things very differently now.
what we're talking about are all the mechanics of how things work. And I think what you're trying to do all the time in a double act is not confuse the audience as to what's going on. They want to know the status, who's in charge, who thinks they're in charge. And they don't really want to think about those things, but they do sense when they're not right, when the status isn't right. They do sense, oh, that's a bit strange. That feels a bit cruel. That feels a bit weird. And they don't give as big a laugh, even though a joke can be brilliant. And you can get 2 laughs, but there'll be a laugh that feels right, and there'll be a laugh that is just a laugh because it's a good joke, you know. And I think when the status and the situation is correct and the characters are doing the things they're supposed to be doing, that's when the laughs are bigger. I think it's like Father Ted, really, Dougal, and you know, they have perfect status, really, and you know, they're a little bit Stan and Laurel. It's very weird, that thing, because it's not really talked about, and the audience don't really want to know about that. You know, they're not interested in really. They feel it, and they are aware of what's going on, but they don't really want to have to worry about that, I don't think. And that's what it's our job to sort of make sure those things are in place so that they laugh properly, you know.
Well, let's have a look at the next clip, which is this is kind of a female Bluebeard, really. Matt, you chose this one, Oliver the Eighth. What was it about Oliver the Eighth?
So me and my older brother Howard, we grew up watching Laurel and Hardy and Harold Lloyd as well. I would say a little bit Chaplin, a little bit Keaton, but mainly Laurel and Hardy and Harold Lloyd, because they were shown at 6 p.m. on BBC Two on weekday nights in the late 70s and early 80s. And it was often the same time that our late father would come home from work and sit down with us, and the 3 of us sit there, I guess, while Mum was cooking supper. And the 3 of us would sit there and watch for 20 minutes Laurel and Hardy. And so Oliver the Eighth, me and my brother loved Oliver the Eighth. One of the things we found hilarious in Oliver the Eighth was when the soup is served and there's no soup, and yet they still eat. So they eat invisible food. And me and my brother thought this was hilarious, and we used to do it. You know, when you sit down at the table and the crockery and cutlery are there, but the food hasn't been brought in yet, me and my brother would never miss an opportunity to pretend to be an Oliver the Eighth. But the other thing about Oliver the Eighth is that if you're a child watching Oliver the Eighth, it's pretty scary.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary. You know, as an adult, you know that Oliver Hardy's not going to die in a film. But as a child, you don't really know that. And there's something creaky and remote about the black and white ness of them as well, and the distance of them. You sort of, as a child, when you're watching something, if you're a child in the 70s or 80s, and you're watching something that's made in the 70s or 80s, you're sort of aware of the sensibility of the time, and you sort of know, roughly what you're going to get, so subconsciously. But if you're in the 70s or 80s and you're watching something from the 20s or 30s, you don't know that era that well. You only sort of know it from these films.
Black and white film.
Yeah. And when I was sitting there in the late 70s and 80s watching Oliver the Eighth, the night before I might have been watching King Kong that they would have shown, or Mighty Joe Young, or something else where characters would have died, even if they were gorillas, giant apes, where there was death. There were, you know, they might have shown a film noir or something like that. There was just lots of black and white films on around 6 o'clock.
I remember my mum being obsessed with those films, and when I was really young, saying to my mum, well, when did colour happen then? Because I thought that life was in black and white, and then suddenly there was colour. And she was like, no, it's just film. It's just, they were in colour, it's just they didn't know how to film it in colour. Right. And I couldn't understand that as a kid. I was like, oh, I just thought they filmed it the same and everything was black and white until like 1935.
That's still, it hasn't changed. My wife works in a school and still has to explain to children that
Yeah.
it wasn't that the First World War was fought in black and white due to budgetary constraints. You know, it's kind of the. See, now, Matt, you've put in my mind, the moment you said King Kong, mixing that with Laurel and Hardy, I can now see the beginning of King Kong with Stan saying, I've got an idea. Why don't we get a giant gorilla from Skull Island? What an excellent idea. And then seeing it right at the end as he's lying on the ground. You know, everything can become a Laurel and Hardy movie, however tragic.
But Matt, do you think because your dad watched it with you that you somehow, as kids, you don't quite understand a lot of things you're seeing, but when you see your parents enjoying them, you love your dad and your mum and they, there's something about you watching them and you're trying to figure it out. There's something really beautiful about that, isn't there? That
because if you'd asked
to you,
if you asked me when I was 10 what my favorite TV show was, I probably would have said Minder. But really, what my favorite experience was sitting with my dad and watching him laugh at Minder and all being all right with the world. I would not have understood at all what Arthur Daly was doing. But I actually had a poster. I had a poster of Arthur Daly and Terry McCann on my wall when I was 10. And it had this phrase where my word is my bond and I'll let Terry fight to the death to prove it, which is quite Laurel and Hardy-esque, actually.
And do you think that that's why you ended up doing the Dennis Waterman, tiny Dennis Waterman things? Because there was a sense
because there's not much satire in those sketches. I mean, it was just a lot of surrealism. I mean, a kernel of an observation.
My mum used to go to keep fit in the evening sometimes, and my dad would let me, I'd be in bed and I go, I can't sleep, Dad. And he'd say, come, he'd be watching Taxi. Do you remember Taxi? Yeah. And he would say, come down, you can watch Taxi and go to bed. And obviously Andy Kaufman was in it. And I just literally, as a child, I just couldn't understand that someone like that existed in real life. Because obviously, like, Danny DeVito is amazing in it. There's loads of good people in it. But Andy Kaufman's like
he's doing a different thing, isn't he? It's almost like Mork.
He's like an alien, isn't he? Yeah, you're sort of
Mork, isn't it, into it.
And I was obsessed with him and Mork, weirdly. And I wonder if it's because you're watching people, and I think Stan Laurel has this, which is interesting. You're watching adults behave like children, and when you're a child, that's really appealing to you because you don't really want to be old when you're a child. You want to imagine that when you're old, you can still behave like a child because that's what you think you want.
The same about when you're a child and you sit with your parents and watch Dad's Army. Your favorite character, Clive Dunn's character, isn't it? Because he's like, he's so with Laurel and Hardy, I wasn't as familiar with the world in the way that I was with contemporary films. And so watching Oliver the Eighth as a child, I genuinely felt there was a threat on Stan and Ollie's lives when watching this film. And often there was an anxiety in watching Laurel and Hardy because female characters in the Laurel and Hardy movies are rarely likable. They're often quite scary. They play high status. They're intimidating. They're shrewish. Yeah. They can get physical with Stan and Ollie. They're pretty terrifying. I mean,
no explanation for why. Well, there is. It's because she got betrayed by an Ollie. But there's, the guy who plays the butler is insane. He's amazing, that guy. But he's sort of, he's already sort of insane immediately, isn't he? You're sort of. But as a kid, you love him because he's almost what's weird about that is, as a kid watching that, you probably think he's the funny one because he's doing so much business up top, and they're sort of. What's amazing about that is he's more of a weirdo than them two. They're kind of going along with his game because they're scared of him, which is an interesting dynamic for them, isn't it? That they almost come together against him, don't they? Which is what you want a double act to do, to argue all the time. And then when there's a common enemy, that they come together and to defeat that common enemy, and that's the whole. Actually, the scene in the bed where they're in bed together reminded me of Withnail and I, where Richard E. Grant, Paul McGann are in bed together with a rifle and Uncle Monty's breaking in the window, and they're sort of, it did remind me of that. And there's an amazing bit where he falls asleep straight away and he says, "Do you want me to get my throat cut?" And he says, "Well, it's not my fault. I had a dream that I was awake. I was dreaming that I was awake," which is just, that is like Spike Milligan. It's so brilliant, that. And that's a verbal joke, So again, the verbal, the written jokes are as good as the visual stuff. Really, it's just
Yeah, definitely.
they have it
Well,
all.
let's have a look at that
Yeah.
clip, and then Matt we'll hear more afterwards. So here is a little bit from Oliver the Eighth.
Don't believe a word she says. She's the one that's crazy, not me. Did you ever have your throat cut?
No.
Well, you're going to.
What do you mean?
When you're asleep tonight, she's going to come into your room and cut your throat. The same as she did to 7 other Olivers.
We better get out of here.
I think so, too. Goodbye.
Bye.
Just a minute. Are all the doors locked?
Yes, madame.
The windows barred?
Yes, madame.
Show these gentlemen to the guest chamber in the left wing.
Yes, madame.
Goodbye, Oliver the Eighth. I hope you have a nice, long sleep.
I wish I hadn't come with my cut.
Goodbye. Well, here's another nice mess you've gotten me into.
What are we going to do? I'm scared to death.
There's only one thing to do. One of us will have to stay awake all night to keep her from cutting my throat.
Well, I can't stay awake all night.
You don't have to. We'll take turns. I'll sleep a while you stay awake, and then while you sleep, I'll stay awake. She'll not catch us napping. Very simple. Here, hang my coat in the closet.
That's a good idea, Ollie.
You bet your life it is.
No, sir. She won't catch us, Nippy. Stay awake while he's... Look what I found.
Is it loaded?
It's a good thing you went inside them.
Give me that gun and get ready for bed. Inside them. Oh.
Is everything in readiness? Are you sure the knife is good and sharp?
Yes, madame.
Now, whatever you do, don't go to sleep until I wake up. And if you see her coming, use the gun. Good night.
Good night.
What are you trying to do? Do you want me to get my throat cut?
No.
Well, then don't go to sleep.
Well, I can't tell when I'm asleep.
That's why I want you to stay awake, so that you can see that you're not asleep.
Well, I couldn't help it. I was dreaming I was awake. And then I woke up and found myself asleep.
I mean,
Wonderful. And what a great move by her over that table.
yeah.
You don't often see that, the sliding over the table. Again, the fact that, as you mentioned, Noel, and you, Matt, that they allowed other people. You know, there are some comics where you think, no, this is about us and everyone else is straight.
Yeah.
And the fact that there you have 4 characters, all of whom are different eccentricity.
I think it's important, isn't it, Matt, to have people that are even. I mean, we had Rich Fulcher, who's pretty insane and nuts. His characters are always quite out there, which is great because I think then we could say to each other, "What's he doing?" You know, like he told me to do this, and you know, he's obviously supposed to be higher status than us, but he's much weirder and more unpredictable than we are. And I think that gives you another game to play, doesn't it? Definitely.
Yeah, I used to turn up in Vic and Bob's stuff, you know, in the same way.
And so they have to deal with you as an entity, don't they? Which, and you're weirder than they are. I mean, so how many brilliant bits in that? I mean, I was looking at the timing of that joke, and he says, "Don't go to sleep," and then you see her with the knife, and then it cuts back, and the shot, everything about that is perfect timing. So he says, whatever you do, don't go to sleep. Cuts to her with a knife to remind you she's going to cut his throat. And when you come back, the shot, Oliver's facing this way, and you can still see Stan, and he's snoring, and that's what's keeping him awake. It's absolutely precision, isn't it? Everything about that's precision. The sequence of those shots to make that joke work the best it'll ever work. You know, the timing of how long you're away with the woman with the knife, and then I mean, the edit is superb, isn't it?
Yeah, it's flawless.
No, I was going to ask you, Matt, also about that joy where when Ollie says about he gets an idea, and it's the most obvious idea in the world, and yet the both of them feel like something remarkable has happened. One of us could stay awake while one of us sleeps. That's part of the joy, I think, is that both of them, they have moments which they see obviously as pure genius. These are Einsteinian moments.
And they're just very simple. Yeah. I think it's a really great film, and often it's slightly forgotten as one of theirs because it is quite unusual. But I think when you're a child and you watch them, as much as you laugh, there is a bit of a sense of unease.
There is
sometimes watching
the jeopardy pie, isn't it? Which is useful.
And because you like them, and because you want them to succeed. When things go really wrong for them, and they often go wrong for them on a sort of cataclysmic scale, don't they? You do sort of feel that you empathize with them quite a lot. Yeah. So when you're a child and you watch the piano falling all the way down the steps, you do think, "Oh no,
I know,
terrible," you know. And there's something about them they pull you in so that you really care for them.
But also, they are like children in as much as their moods are so up and down. Like they're terrified, and then he says, "We'll just stay awake," and then they're fine. 5 seconds later, they're absolutely fine with that plan, and they're happy. They're not even upset anymore. So they do that thing that kids do, where they oscillate. They go from being really upset to absolutely happy a lot. So you're watching their emotional sort of journey, aren't you? You know.
Yeah.
They're conveying that to the audience, aren't they? That, oh, it's okay again. Oh, no, it's wrong again. Oh, now it's frightening. Now it's this, you know.
Let's see if we can get, because we're going to, I'm just going to say, by the way, to everyone, that what we'll do is all the clips that we haven't been able to use, I'll just introduce at the end, and you can imagine what Matt and Noel would have said, and it'll be a nice game for you to play. But let's have a quick look at, this is Stan lighting his thumb, going into a little bit of the Boosh. And of course, the thumb lighting, a very, very famous moment. Let's have a look at this.
Chance or no chance, we've...
Do you mind?
It's pretty good though, isn't it? I can do other elements.
Can you really? Can you do fog?
I mean, it's insane really, because you realise you're so influenced by them. And you know, that there's the camera is the whole room, you know, and it's just playing out in full, you know. The timing is very naturalistic, and you know, that's the end joke was a long sequence, you know, where he's shutting the window and then he's shutting the door and he's trying to concentrate. He's trying to write a novel and he obviously can't do it. And I'm just annoying him. But you're quite, once you establish the scenario, and if the audience like the characters, they're quite happy to just watch them be, you know, and it's not sort of downtime at the zoo really there's nothing really happening other than between us, you know. He's trying to write a great novel so that he can impress a woman, and I'm not interested in that at all. I like working at the zoo. But you know enough about us to let us play those games and enjoy them, which is, it's funny what, looking back, I guess because we did things live, so we'd use a lot of sound effects. I guess you did as well. You guys did, didn't you? I think they work really well on stage, sound effects, I think, especially in a double act. So we often try to do those things on television, which, you know, they're slightly less powerful, but they can still work. But yeah, having now watched that again, that was a long time ago. Yeah, I can see how massively influenced we were by those two.
There's nothing better than a slapstick event that ends with a lawsuit.
Something gloriously analog about that. I know that I don't mean that to sound pretentious, but when we used to do the Dennis Waterman sketches, we could have done them with CGI, and green screen, but we didn't. We built 2 sets, and the joy was in the slight clunkiness and the slight retroness of how we were achieving the jokes. And so, you know, you'd see a mouse, and Dennis being very afraid by a mouse, and it'd be a real mouse, and then you'd cut to Paul Putner, our kind of wingman, in a mouse costume just walking out the door. You know, that was and that was a close-up in Dennis's world, you know, of how big the mouse was. So again, scale meant nothing to us. All that mattered was what would get the biggest laugh. And I think there's hopefully a charm in that, and that's the charm in Laurel and Hardy. Although having said that, I've still no idea how do you think his thumb was on fire? How do you think they did that?
See, with Harold Lloyd, it would be easier because, of course, there was one hand where he didn't have a thumb on it, so you could use a false thumb.
Right. But how do you think they did that? Do you think they just coated it with something that would protect his thumb and then actually set it on fire? They probably did, didn't they?
I presume, there must have been something behind. So you light something and then you've got some kind of petroleum jelly or whatever. Don't do this at home. Don't work out how to set fire to thumbs. Second lawsuit. We had no lawsuits in the first 50 minutes. Now we've got 2.
They were all quite brave, weren't they, those guys? They didn't mind injuring themselves for comedy, did they? I don't think. They were all happy. Remarkable. Well, you know what, as well, you're right, Matt, because I think the dummy in the music box being dragged behind the piano going down the stairs is very funny. And we were always saying things that were in camera, in actual, you know, that were there physically, that had weight, were always funnier for us, you know. And then when the CGI started coming in, we did find it very tricky to make that as funny, you know. I don't know why it is. I think there's something about, you can tell it's not there. You can tell it's not real. And even though dummies aren't real, they're more like a magic trick or something, aren't they? They have a certain to them. And
you can kind of enjoy the nerve. You know, when you see there's a bit in there's that great sequence of in Morecambe and Wise where they're doing There Is Nothing Like a Dame, and they just have really unlikely boys in the chorus, sort of newsreaders and weathermen and just people that you wouldn't expect. And there's a bit where somebody does an amazing somersault and you cut, and it's just really obvious that it's not the person that you know, it's really obvious they've used a stunt dancer, and that obviousness is adds to the joy. You get a laugh out of it.
Absolutely. I remember
it could have been Eddie Waring. Let's have a quick look at because I don't want to miss this out, because Pompidou is such a wonderful series and won a slapstick award as well. And let's have a quick look at Birthmarks. Laurel and Hardy's Birthmarks, going into a bit of Matt's work, Pompidou.
All aboard! What did he say? Does this train go to Pottsville? Keep your ears open. All aboard! All trains going west. Omaha, New York City, all aboard. Thank you. All aboard. All trains going west. And Pottsville. That's our train.
Wonderful.
Yeah, no child wants to apologise, do they?
That was, and we've run out of time already. And thank you so much for joining the Slapstick Festival. And as I said, we'll put up. I'll do some introductions to all the clips that you didn't see. Good. We didn't show the clips of influences, which is good because that could have been the third lawsuit thing. So that was great. And then when do we see you together back on screen? When are you going to be back in the cake arena?
In the cake tent. I don't know, actually. When is it? I don't know. I haven't said.
No, because they're working out whether to do it in a bubble or not in a bubble. So you will see us. We are going to do another. They're out there now finding new bakers to compete, but we don't know. I mean, in the next few months, we'll be together. We're together again. Won't we?
Brilliant. And we should tell the audience, by the way, the paintings behind Noel are his own paintings, and Matt designed the sofa he's sitting on. So that's all true. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Slapstick Festival. Thank you so much for Matt and Noel for them to joining us. I don't know how that sentence works. Actually, I put the words in all manner of orders, and you can just give them a round of applause from your house. It doesn't mean that they can hear it, but nevertheless, it still gives some sense of connection for you.
And thank you, Robin. Thank you so much. It's so nice to chat with you again.
I knew we'd never fit through all that. That was never going to happen.
That was such fun. Thank you both.
Thank you.